my question.
Beginning. Welcome, everyone, to the Culinary podcast. My name is Matt Britt.
And I'm Jamie Schick.
And today we're joined by Dr. Kelly Cleary, who's going to give us amazing insight to something that is sort of rapidly impacting food, the food industry, chefs, how they plan menus. That is the alpha-gal thing. So, Kelly, welcome to the pod. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks so much for having me to talk about alpha-gal syndrome today. My name, as you said, is Kelly Cleary, and I am the medical director and vice president of health and education at FARE, Food Allergy Research and Education, which is a national nonprofit dedicated to food allergies for research, advocacy, education of the community. And my background is I did a residency in pediatrics and a fellowship in emergency medicine, and I'm a mom to 4 kids, one of whom has multiple anaphylactic food allergies. So that is what sparked the passion for food allergy and brought me here today. And I'm really excited to talk about alpha-gal because we are seeing numbers spike, and we're seeing a lot of people in the community who have questions and are asking about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm so excited to learn a little bit more about this too, because growing up in New Hampshire in the woods, we're always told, check yourself for ticks whenever you go outside, especially this time of year. But it was always because of the concern for Lyme disease and not necessarily for alpha-gal syndrome, which we are hearing about a lot today, which creates this allergy to red meat or mammal products.
Correct. And it's really interesting because I'm sure in your world you've dealt a lot with food allergies, right? So, patrons coming in that declare a food allergy and you know and recognize what that is. Well, alpha-gal syndrome is actually a food allergy that is triggered by a tick bite. So now this is actually a food allergy that is caused after a tick bites someone. And it's caused by this carbohydrate that is this carbohydrate that is galactose alpha 1,3 galactose, otherwise known as alpha-gal. But what happens is the tick makes that carbohydrate, bites a human, and humans don't have that carbohydrate. So we start to mount a response. And that's how that food allergy is caused. So now we're seeing a lot more alpha-gal, traveling around. And now the concern really does extend beyond Lyme disease and to alpha-gal with tick bites.
And it's so crazy to think about, because like maybe it's just me, but when I think about like food allergies, I think about people living with food allergies for a long period of time. You mentioned you have 4 kids, one of them has severe food allergies. I mean, those onsets probably happened when they were very young. And alpha-gal has the ability, obviously with no known cure, to impact someone who's well into their life. So there's a lot of habits there. There's a lot of like transition that has to happen based on this tick bite, which, honestly can happen anywhere. I mean, what's the numbers right now in Martha's Vineyard are crazy. It's like 50% of the population or something is now infected with this alpha-gal, and chefs are changing the way that they do business to now accommodate this like really booming, which sounds good, but it's actually really scary, syndrome.
You're right. It's very scary. It's frightening. It's fascinating, but it's frightening. And as you said, a lot of people who are diagnosed with food allergy are diagnosed young. But this now can occur anytime throughout your life as someone is affected by that tick bite. And you're absolutely right into the incidence. It is growing and growing. We're seeing it now reported on 6 continents. The
Wow.
latest CDC data is showing that almost 500,000 people are affected by alpha-gal, and most experts in the field think that that is a underestimate of the number of people affected.
That is crazy. And are there ways to know if you do get bit? How do you go about finding out if you have this or not?
So it's interesting because a lot of times in diagnosing alpha-gal, most people don't even remember when they got bitten by the tick. So the tick that is most known to be causing alpha-gal is called the Lone Star tick. But experts think that there really could be other, carriers that will allow for alpha-gal to happen. But the tick bite itself, once it happens, you won't have symptoms of alpha-gal for another couple of weeks to months. And then the way that alpha-gal presents is very different than a typical food allergy. So a typical food allergy, and take my son for example, he's allergic to peanuts. If he eats a peanut, then at your restaurant, he is going to start developing signs and symptoms of an allergic reaction, maybe getting, a rash or swelling of his mouth, difficulty breathing, maybe vomiting. Someone with alpha gal, when they're exposed to a mammalian product or meat in this case, they don't get symptoms for 2 to sometimes 8 hours
Wow.
after ingestion. So that's what makes it so hard to diagnose, and really just a very tricky syndrome that we're talking about here.
Wow, that could be really scary. Like 8 hours later?
Terrifying.
Yeah,
Terrifying,
like, and
dangerous.
not knowing, like, what's causing it. So, I'm guessing the best thing to do would be obviously to see a doctor and get a diagnosis. And then from there, you talked about having an allergy and going to a restaurant. Do you have any tips on how people can disclose their allergies to restaurants? And we're thinking like cross contamination and all of that, especially with mammal products, right? We're talking like things like gelatin, even like so many things.
There are so many places that alpha gal pops up in, which actually makes it unique and distinct from other food allergies. So, other food allergies, if you look at something like a milk allergy, right, you know that as you're looking at those ingredients, you're also looking for things like casein or whey. Alpha gal finds its way into things that aren't labeled, right? So it makes it really difficult for the person with alpha gal and people who are serving that person to really understand their allergy. We always say at FARE, one of the best ways to convey your allergy is through a chef card, where you're writing
Mm.
down exactly what you know you would be allergic to. So that it also just allows for that progression of the information from whoever sees you first to the person preparing your food and then bringing it. It kind of allows for some continuity there. So that's a good way to do it. But alpha gal likes to really be inconsistent. So sometimes it's going to be about individualizing what is going on for each person.
It's so fascinating, and I mean, I have questions about obviously the card and how this is becoming more inundated into sort of the food scene. I mean, in places like Martha's Vineyard, where there's such a predominant like sort of outbreak, I think chefs are universally aware of this. But do you think that, being on 6 continents with so many people being impacted by this, I mean, I was just at a conference last 4 days, and we did this whole thing about challenging participants to make dishes to specific food allergies. And there were chefs from across the country who had no clue what alpha gal is. So how do we like really, or how is fair, or how do we as chefs on the other side of the food card educate our customers on this sort of important like new development?
Well, what you're bringing up is not unique to the culinary world. And in fact, the latest data actually showed that almost 75% of physicians who were asked about alpha gal knew very little about it. So that in and of itself makes it for FARE a mission of ours to really get that education out. Because again, this is a food allergy that can be prevented with tick bite precautions. So this is something that really needs to get out to the general public. And sometimes that message is slow. So that's why I love that you guys are doing an episode on this, because more and more people being affected by alpha gal going out to dinner and needing to be, get those accommodations for this. And I know we had mentioned before, Jaime mentioned cross contact, and that could actually be a really big issue with alpha gal as it is with other food allergies. So in the food allergy realm, we don't use cross contamination, we use cross contact. So for cross contamination, we say is, if and you guys would know the terminology better than me, but I think about a chicken cutlet. And if I'm touching it with my hands, getting that bacteria and virus on it, cross contact is actually the accidental transfer of an allergen. So that would be cooking, the steak or something with dairy, and then cooking a piece of fish for someone with alpha gal. That could transfer that allergen through that cross contact. So it really is thinking about it in multiple layers. But again, you're both right in that education is needed in every sector of our society right now about alpha gal, because it's little known. It's not well known, and certainly not as well known as other food allergies.
So So what you're saying, and I think this is really important because some as culinary educators, we get a lot of students, and maybe I'm just getting older, but I feel like it's becoming bigger in numbers of the amount of students that are coming to us with these allergies, some of which are really, really severe. Like I had a student that had to wear a mask in class because even the sort of just it like breathing in of pineapple made her break out. So what you're saying is that this allergy not only is weirdly inconsistent on what the onset and how it impacts you, but also it's susceptible to cross contact. So if I grilled a piece of meat on the same grill that I then grilled a piece of fish, I'm potentially putting my guest in danger. It's that serious, is what you're saying.
It's that serious. You're potentially transferring the alpha gal, and in this case, it's a carbohydrate, not a protein. But you could be transferring alpha gal from one piece of food to the next. And again, that's you see that often in food allergy, but in alpha gal, that is something that sometimes people don't really recognize. Another place that people can get symptoms if they have alpha gal is through fumes. So actually just being around the smell of cooking these mammalian products can induce symptoms. So it is just as serious as typical food allergies. And I will again say you're right in the number of food allergies in our country is continues to rise, and the severity really varies from person to person and can be as severe as a life-threatening reaction. And the same holds true for alpha gal syndrome.
You said something earlier that I want to touch on. I think alpha gal is really unique for a lot of reasons. And one being that it could be preventable because you talked about like tick bite prevention, whereas some other allergies, like to peanuts, isn't really preventable. Like it's just something that you have and you can't prevent that type of allergy. Do you mind talking a little bit about some like tick precaution safety measures people can take to try to avoid getting bit?
Yeah. So one of the best things that you can do for avoiding tick bites, awareness, right? So people who are always out, in tick areas or endemic areas like hunters or farmers, just being aware. Then you really want to think about repellents. One of the best places to go to look at, the repellents that are recommended is like the EPA.gov, right? They've got a great place for insect repellents that tells you about the level of DEET and things like that. Really monitoring yourself, right? So wearing light colors, which is something that a hunter, I don't hunt, but a hunter probably wouldn't do, right? Because light colors and you're more visible, but that's also you're able to see the tick a little bit better. So
Mm.
tick checks are super important. Repellent is important. Showering after you are outside. Also thinking about your pets, right? Because pets can be a vector of ticks. So really thinking about all of that and thinking about how you can protect yourself against a tick bite. And I will say one quick thing because this is, as a food allergy passionate person, we also say prevention that there's a large part of our majority of people who are even getting allergies like peanut that they can prevent that allergy when they are infants by actually consuming early and often some of these food allergens. So that's
Mm.
a whole nother topic, but
Oh, wow.
just
Okay.
just throwing it out there because it's a passion of ours and but this truly is alpha gal syndrome is truly an allergen that can be prevented with tick prevention. So it's very interesting.
So I agree with you 100% that early introduction is a great way to potentially prevent some of those allergens that, as Jamie mentioned, you just get, whether that's shellfish or peanuts. The scary part about this is you really, I mean, even with a tick check, I mean, I tick check my three kids every night. And I go to bed afterwards being like, what did I miss? Like, because, you got all these things going on. Like, let's say someone is, unlucky and it just happens and they get bit by the Lone Star tick and they develop alpha gal syndrome. Is there, I've heard that there's no hope right now for resolving that. Do you feel like this is something based on sort of allergy, work in the past that we might find a resolution for, a cure for? Is this, or is this, you're just stuck with it?
So again, I'm probably a very hopeful person because I've seen a lot of change within the food allergy world too, and some ways that really can help the community in managing the lifestyle of food allergies. So I think there are some ways if you do have alpha gal, there are people with alpha gal that, their symptoms start to wane over time. And one of the key features of that, again, is to avoid being bitten by a second tick that would
Mm,
reintroduce that alpha gal. So that's one. And then there are some medications that really can cross over from the food allergy world because alpha gal, again, is an IgE mediated food allergy. So it has that same exact, that pathway that a typical food allergy has because they're both what we call IgE mediated. So some of those medications are crossing over and can help people with alpha gal to deal with the burden of the disease.
oh,
But again,
wait.
just like typical food allergies, it's typically something that people will have to deal with. But there are certain circumstances within alpha gal where you can see waning symptoms. But again, tick prevention is really important in that scenario.
So, with this becoming more prominent and people becoming more aware of it, even though I think total, awareness and total understanding is probably far out there, just like it is with most allergies, right? Some people just don't know. What is the likelihood that there's movement on adding alpha gal to the existing list of, let's say, 9 major allergens that we as chefs are like inundated with as like, you need to watch out for these when they come into your restaurant? Do you think we're even close to alpha gal making the cut there?
I can tell that lots of advocacy organizations like FARE are really actively petitioning for that legislation and for alpha gal to be labeled as that 10th food allergen. If you look at the data with the CDC and the number of people who are affected, it would actually qualify as that 10th allergen, right? Because those top 9 are really based on the prevalence of food allergens within the United States. So alpha gal would be that 10th allergen. And
Mm.
it's just so important in labeling, not only for the hidden places that it is, but even for us. There are a lot of medications and over the counter products that people are finding alpha gal in, as well as their food, because there's mammalian byproduct in some of those as well. So I'm hopeful that it'll be the 10th allergen at some point.
Well, it makes sense to increase awareness for sure, especially for the chef community, for people in general. I do though just want to kind of circle back to something that I mentioned at the beginning, and that was Lyme disease. That's still something we need to be concerned about with tick bites, right? That's not going away. That because we don't know what type of tick we may have been bit with at the beginning.
Correct. So tick bites in general, you're not going to know if you were affected, to the point of developing some type of disease. And Lyme disease is certainly still out there. Alpha gal, why we're seeing more is because what the primary vector, and again there may be other vectors, but that primary tick is the Lone Star tick. And as that Lone Star tick starts to migrate into different places and people are traveling, we're seeing alpha gal, across the country. So that's why we're seeing so much more of that. It's not that we're seeing less of Lyme disease, it's just that we're seeing more of alpha gal because more people are affected with the migration of the tick.
It's you mentioned the movement of the tick impacting sort of the awareness of like what people are. And as chefs, I do think that we've taken steps called in the last 10 years to be more flexible, right? I remember when I was in culinary school, not that long ago, but a pretty long time ago, we were like inundated with like, the chef is right. This is the menu. We're not changing. We're seeing different approaches now. But what is your hope in how like restaurants embrace food allergens as a whole, not just alpha gal? Like, what do you think should be the mindset in order to not only accommodate our guests but also to sustain your business? Because sometimes cooking one-off meals for everyone who comes in the restaurant isn't necessarily the most sustainable business plan. Like, what's that happy medium in your eyes as a mom, as someone who's not a chef by trade?
Yeah, and I can tell you, FAIR has actually done some research on the food allergy consumer journey, and they conducted that research with McKinsey and really found that trust is the key driver to food allergy consumers' behaviors. And I could really, say that that's the life that we live. My son has multiple anaphylactic food allergies, including egg, peanut, and shellfish. And when he was younger, we never went out to dinner because we didn't feel like, I was trusting someone outside of our home with creating him a meal that maybe did require extra care and did require someone to do something different. I can tell you some of the most probably wonderful moments in our lives have happened now in restaurants when someone has just taken that extra step to say to us, I am going to be as careful as we can. And I recognize what you're telling me. And I know what he's allergic to. And I know that cross contact is an issue to him. And I am going to do the best that I physically can to give you this meal. I can tell you one of the best times that we had, we were out and had mentioned all of his allergens in the beginning of a meal. And it happened to be Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving. So imagine how busy the kitchen was at that moment. And at the end of the meal, as they brought the dessert menus out, we said, "Oh, no dessert. We usually skip dessert as a family because he's allergic to eggs." And we were sitting there for a little while longer, and the chef himself came out with a plate of desserts like after a half hour, and he was like, "I just whipped this up. Nothing has egg in it." And I can't tell you that the feeling of wow, like we were seen, we were recognized, but it just made that day a lot better. And for my son to feel like he was recognized was huge. And I've heard that time and time again from the alpha gal community that they're feeling it as well, and there is a little bit of trepidation, I think, on both sides because it's new, people don't understand it, and there's a lot of explaining that has to happen. But I always find that the best encounters are when the culinary team and the people at the restaurant are willing to listen, and the person with alpha gal or any other food allergy is willing to advocate for themselves and give that information out.
Yeah, it sounds like trust, communication, education, and are all like really the top things that need to happen. And you telling that story, it just being a pastry chef, it reminds me like all of the reasons why we we as chefs do this. Like being able to create that experience for someone is truly what brings us joy. Like I used to love surprising guests that used to have a lot of allergies and thought they couldn't have anything. And if I know ahead of time, I loved knowing because then I could have something ready as like a little I was thinking about you. I wanted to make sure your meal was complete. And that that story just made me so happy and just reminded me of like why we as chefs do what we do because that's what we want to do that for our guests. We want to create those experiences and we want to do it safely for people with allergies.
And I think sometimes you might not even realize the impact that you're having on the customer. We had another experience that my son was little. We were actually at Disney, and he had just gotten out of the intensive care unit for an anaphylactic reaction the week before. He needed 4 epinephrines, was almost intubated. We almost canceled our trip. My husband was like, "No, let's just let's try to keep on going. We'll go. We'll just be really careful." We signed up for a dessert something, and only because it was a good place to see fireworks with little kids. And I wrote on the message, "No desserts needed." We have food allergies. And I always joke to my colleagues and friends, I'm not an overly emotional person. I didn't cry at my wedding or the birth of my children. That was a night I remember crying. On our table when we got there was this entire platter of desserts. And I freaked out and was like, "No, no, no, we can't have those because he's allergic." And they said, "Nope." They came in an hour early. This is all safe for him. And I started to tear up. And the impact that has, that I'm recalling that story now 10 years later, because that was a moment for us. And again, not knowing what had happened to us the week before, it's really impactful. The things, when you're going the extra mile, it's really impactful for families.
That's so inspiring to hear. And I just think that like sort of the hospitality like undertone it does transcend beyond just, food, which we obviously connect hospitality with food, but it involves lodging, it involves travel, it involves everything that like we live in our daily lives. And those moments, I mean, when you do experience them, and like sometimes we'll get students that will say like, I had this great experience, and like now you get it. Now you understand why we do this. You mentioned trust as being sort of like the cornerstone of that relationship between food allergens and the hospitality industry. So we'll end on this because I think we trust you to tell on telling us that alpha gal is a pretty serious thing. So do those tick checks, be conscientious, and obviously be careful because it's pretty significant.
Yeah, and be willing to learn and be educated, and as you guys are doing right now, and that's why places like FARE are really grateful. Anytime we can spread the message of alpha gal or any other food allergy that's out there. So thank you for doing what you do, and for teaching chefs coming into this arena that food allergies matter, and it's really important and really could be such a meaningful experience for those diners.
Well, Dr. Kelly Cleary, thank you so much for taking the time. I know FAIR is actually going to be part of our Johnson and Wales Fit Symposium in November. So obviously that'll be even a deeper dive into almost like a case study around alpha gal, and we're going to just really put allergens front and center because they are so prominent and they are so serious. And as chefs, we have the responsibility to take them as such. So, Dr. Cleary, thank you so much for joining us on a
Thank
Friday.
you.
You have a fantastic weekend.
You as well. Thank you.